Every major investigation has a moment where a single piece of evidence stops everyone in the room cold. Not because it's dramatic, not because it's loud, but because of what it quietly reveals about the person behind it. This is that moment. Somewhere in a quiet residential neighborhood, at exactly 1:47 in the morning, a figure appears on a security feed. No car, no visible accomplice. Just one person moving through the dark with a level of calm that doesn't belong to someone operating in an unfamiliar space. The timestamp burns in the corner of the frame. The street behind them is completely dead. And then, without a single second of hesitation, that figure walks in a straight, deliberate, unwavering line directly toward the front door. No scanning, no circling, no testing the perimeter. Straight line, front door. And before the footage even has time to process what's happening, the security doorbell camera goes dark. One precise movement, one surgical reach. The only digital witness on that property, neutralized in seconds. That footage spread across the internet like a current. People watched it once, then again, then a third time, leaning closer to their screens each time. Because the behavior in that clip doesn't match what most people understand a random intruder to look like. This person didn't stumble onto this property. They arrived with a mental map already loaded. Here's what you need to understand before this case goes any deeper. The woman inside that house was 84 years old. Her name was Nancy Guthrie. And just under 4 hours before that masked figure appeared on her porch, she had been sitting at a family dinner table, completely safe, completely surrounded by people who loved her. By morning, she was gone. If you're new to this channel and cases like this matter to you, go ahead and subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Every week, this channel breaks down the forensic details that the headlines skip over. You don't want to miss what comes next in this case, because the deeper this investigation goes, the more one specific question keeps surfacing. The internet looked at that footage and immediately started pointing fingers, not at a stranger, not at a random face, but at someone connected to that dinner table. And as investigators began pulling apart the evidence layer by layer, the forensic logic behind that suspicion became very difficult to dismiss. For hours of silence between a closing garage door and a masked man on a porch, one straight line, one disabled camera, one question that federal investigators, behavioral analysts, and millions of people online cannot stop circling back to. Who told him exactly where to look? To understand why that footage shook the internet the way it did, you have to understand who was inside that house. Nancy Guthrie was not a public figure. She was not someone whose name appeared on television or whose face filled a news ticker. She was a mother, a grandmother, a woman who had lived in the same single-story brick home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona, for over 50 years. The same house where her children grew up. The same desert neighborhood she once described on camera as having a quality of life that was laid-back and gentle. She was born in Fort Wright, Kentucky, in January of 1942. She raised 3 children largely on her own after losing her husband, Charles, to a sudden cardiac event in 1988 when her youngest was still in high school. She worked in university public relations at the University of Arizona for nearly 2 decades. By every account, she was a woman deeply woven into the fabric of a community she had called home for more than half a century. She was also the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today show, one of the most recognizable faces in American morning television. That detail matters. Not because it changes the forensics of what happened. It doesn't. But it explains precisely why this case erupted across every platform within hours of the missing persons report. It explains why the footage spread. It explains why millions of people who had never heard of Catalina foothills, Arizona, suddenly had opinions about a garage door timestamp. And that timestamp is everything. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, Nancy attended a family dinner at the Tucson home of her daughter Annie and Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni. The evening was routine, quiet, family. At 9:48 p.m., a family member drove her home. The garage door opened. At exactly 9:50 p.m., it closed. That electronic signal, logged by the home security system, became the fixed forensic anchor point of the entire federal investigation. Everything before it was verified, everything after it was unknown. And the street went silent. The house went dark. And for the next 3 hours and 57 minutes, not a single alarm triggered. Not a single sensor activated. Not a single digital footprint moved inside that residence. Then 1:47 a.m. arrived, and everything changed. If this case already has you locked in, hit subscribe right now so you never miss a breakdown on this channel. Because what the investigation uncovered next goes much deeper than a single night. In criminal investigation, there's a protocol that never changes. It doesn't matter how cooperative a person is. It doesn't matter how trusted they are within the family. The last verified person to have physical contact with a missing individual becomes the immediate forensic center of gravity. Not a suspect, not a villain, a data point, arguably the most critical data point on the board. And in this case, that data point had a name: Tommaso Caione, husband of Annie Guthrie, son-in-law of Nancy, a schoolteacher by profession, a man described by everyone around him as a devoted, caring family member. He was the person sitting in the driver's seat when the garage door closed at 9:50 that night. He was the last set of eyes to confirm Nancy was inside that house. And when the federal investigation launched, within hours of her disappearance being reported on February 1st, that single fact placed him under a level of scrutiny that no innocent person should ever have to endure. Ask yourself, if you were the lead investigator walking into that briefing room, where would you look first? You'd look exactly where the FBI looked. At the last known contact point, at the 10-minute drive from Annie's home to Nancy's, at the driveway, at the timeline. Every investigator in that room knew the golden rule of missing persons casework. The window of vulnerability opens the moment the last known contact walks away. Everything that happened to Nancy Guthrie happened after Tommaso Caione drove away from that house. So the questions started immediately. They weren't accusations. They were forensic necessities. What exact route did he drive? How long did he sit in the driveway? Did he watch her walk inside, or just watch the garage door close? Did he receive any calls or send any messages on the drive back? Did his phone data place him exactly where his account said he was? Every single second of that 10-minute window had to be reconstructed, verified, or locked down before the investigation could responsibly look anywhere else. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed that Caione stated he waited until Nancy was safely inside before leaving the property. That statement became a key forensic marker. It meant his account placed him at the residence slightly longer than a simple drop-off would require. The digital breadcrumbs from his device had to confirm every beat of that version of events. Here's where the public narrative and the investigative reality began to split apart. A journalist publicly labeled Tommaso Caione a primary suspect. The Pima County Sheriff's Office responded swiftly and directly. No such designation had ever been made by law enforcement. Caione was never formally named a suspect. He cooperated fully. He handed over his devices. He allowed authorities to take his vehicle. He cleared a polygraph examination. Law enforcement officially cleared Tommaso Caione and the entire family of direct involvement. But the internet did not move on, because clearing someone of direct physical involvement is not the same as answering the deeper forensic question that the evidence keeps surfacing. And that question is not about guilt. It's about information. It's about exactly how much the masked figure on that porch already knew before he ever set foot on the property. And that thread leads somewhere that the investigation has not finished pulling yet. On February 10th, 2026, FBI Director Kash Patel posted 4 black-and-white images on social media. Within hours, those images had been viewed by millions of people worldwide, not because of what they showed on the surface, but because of what every trained investigator who looked at them immediately understood. The footage came from Nancy Guthrie's Google Nest doorbell camera, and the figure standing in that frame was covered head to toe. Full-face ski mask, gloves, zipped jacket, long pants, a backpack strapped to his back, a flashlight held between his teeth, and a firearm sitting in a front holster at his waist. Every inch of exposed skin deliberately concealed. That level of preparation doesn't happen by accident. It's a calculated, deliberate decision made before leaving the house. This person arrived dressed for a specific operation. But here's where behavioral analysis separates a trained investigator from a casual observer. When former FBI Assistant Director Frank Figliuzzi reviewed the footage, his assessment was immediate. The preparation visible in that frame pointed toward one specific conclusion. This was not opportunistic. This was organized. Every item on that figure's body served a purpose. The gloves eliminated fingerprints. The full coverage eliminated any exposed skin that could shed cellular material. The backpack suggested he came prepared to carry something out, and the flashlight in his teeth kept both hands operational at all times. Now look at the weapon. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe pointed out something that no casual viewer would catch. The holster placement, sitting low near the center of the figure's body, is a position that no trained law enforcement or military professional would ever use. It's functionally impractical, and it signals something precise to investigators. So this person had access to a firearm and chose to carry it. But they were not professionally trained in its use. That combination, organized planning, improvised tactical execution, tells behavioral analysts that they're looking at someone dangerous, but not a career criminal. Someone who prepared obsessively, but operated outside a professional framework. What you need to sit with for a moment is this. That footage did not capture one visit. It captured at least two. Investigators confirmed that the masked figure had appeared at Nancy Guthrie's front door on more than one occasion before February 1st, pre-operational surveillance. A reconnaissance visit. He came to the property beforehand, studied the layout, identified the camera position, and then returned on the night in question with a deliberate plan already constructed. This was not a crime of impulse. There was a planning window. There was a decision process. Someone sat somewhere and decided in advance that this specific house, on this specific night, with this specific woman alone inside, was the target. And the camera. This is the forensic detail that the internet could not stop circling. He did not search for it. He did not scan the doorframe looking for a lens. He walked directly to it and covered it, first with a gloved hand, then with foliage pulled from a nearby potted plant. The FBI's own technical team noted he attempted to knock it free with light taps before resorting to physically concealing the lens. But here's what the perpetrator did not account for. The footage had already uploaded. The data existed in back-end cloud systems. Working with Google's technical team, the FBI's Forensic Recovery Unit pulled every frame of residual data from those back-end servers. The camera was covered. The footage survived anyway. What that footage ultimately gave investigators was not just a face. It gave them a profile. Estimated height between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches. Average build, a dark mustache visible beneath the mask, and a specific backpack, an Ozark Trail 25-liter hiker pack sold exclusively at Walmart, potentially purchased through a secondary resale channel. 13,000 tips flooded the FBI tip line within days of that footage being released. But as investigators began feeding that behavioral profile back into the evidence already collected from inside the house, they kept arriving at the same question, the one question that raw footage alone could not answer. This person knew the camera was there. He knew the layout. He knew the schedule. The footage told investigators who they were looking at. The evidence inside that house told them something even more unsettling. Someone had described it to him first. Every investigation has a moment where a single data point reframes everything the forensic team thought they understood. In this case, that data point was not a fingerprint. It was not a fiber. It was not a footprint pressed into the desert soil outside a back door. It was a timestamp logged at 2:28 in the morning by a pacemaker. Nancy Guthrie had a heart condition that required daily medication. She wore a pacemaker, a medical device implanted in her chest that regulated her heartbeat and transmitted health data wirelessly to her Apple Watch, which in turn synced to an app on her phone. That phone was found inside the residence. Her purse was inside. Her wallet was inside. Her vehicle was still parked in the garage. Nancy Guthrie left nothing behind voluntarily. But at exactly 2:28 a.m. on February 1st, the pacemaker application on her phone registered a disconnection event. The sync between her pacemaker and her Apple devices simply stopped. Now, here's what that means forensically, and this part is critical. Digital forensics experts who reviewed the data were precise about this. A pacemaker disconnect does not indicate that the device stopped functioning. It indicates distance. The pacemaker uses near-field Bluetooth communication to sync with a paired device. It operates within a limited range. When the signal dropped at 2:28 a.m., the most probable explanation was not a medical event. It was movement. Nancy had been carried, walked, or transported far enough away from her phone that the Bluetooth connection could no longer hold. In other words, 2:28 a.m. is likely the closest the investigation has to the moment she was removed from the property. 41 minutes after the doorbell camera went dark at 1:47. 41 minutes of activity inside that house, unrecorded and unwitnessed. And the Apple Watch itself became a separate forensic thread entirely, because investigators confirmed something in the early days of the investigation that the behavioral analysis team had already flagged from the camera footage. The masked figure who entered that residence knew exactly where to go in the dark. The Apple Watch, a small device typically left charging on a bedside table or a specific surface, was targeted immediately. Securing it was not about theft. It was about neutralizing an emergency lifeline. An Apple Watch with cellular capability can place an SOS call independently of a phone. By locating and securing that device first, the intruder eliminated Nancy's fastest path to outside contact. That level of precision inside a dark, unfamiliar house in the middle of the night does not come from instinct. Ask yourself this. If you walked into a house you had never been inside before at 2 o'clock in the morning with no lights on, how long would it take you to find a specific small device on a specific surface in a specific room? Now ask yourself how long it would take if someone had already described the layout to you in detail. That question is the engine that drove the internet's suspicion. And it's the same question that federal behavioral analysts have been working backward from since the first week of the investigation. What the digital trail from that pacemaker told investigators was when she left. The precision inside that house told them who sent the person to find her. And somewhere between those two data points, the masked man on the porch had already been given everything he needed. Federal investigators do not operate on coincidence. They operate on probability. And when you lay out everything the masked figure on that porch already knew, the camera position, the interior layout, the location of the Apple Watch, the precise isolation window after 10 p.m., the probability calculation produces one answer with uncomfortable consistency. Someone who had access to the inside of that house, or access to the people who did, fed this operation its blueprint. That conclusion did not originate on social media. It came from trained investigators. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffin-Daffer reviewed the doorbell footage within days of its public release. Her assessment was direct. The person in that clip did not discover the camera. They already knew where it was. They approached with their head down and moved in a straight line toward it before looking up. That specific sequence, head down, direct approach, eyes up only when already at the target, is the behavioral signature of someone operating from a mental map they had already memorized. Coffin-Daffer did not hesitate in her conclusion. This was targeted. This was not random. And critically, she stated her belief that the person visible in that footage did not act alone. There was, in her assessment, a second layer to this operation. Someone behind the masked figure, someone who understood the layout, the schedule, and the household's specific routines well enough to brief another person on them. That second layer is where the dinner table theory takes hold. On the evening of January 31st, Nancy sat at the table inside her daughter Annie's home. The conversation that evening was ordinary. Family, food, the kind of quiet domestic detail that gets mentioned without a second thought. What time she needed to leave. That she would be home alone. That the house would be dark and quiet after 10 o'clock. Those details, spoken casually, innocently, in the warmth of a family kitchen, are precisely the kind of operational intelligence that transforms a target from an idea into a plan. Think about that for a moment. You've had conversations like that. Everyone has. Mentioning offhand that a parent lives alone, that they go to bed early, that nobody checks on them until morning. To the people at the table, it's nothing. To the wrong set of ears, connected to the wrong network of people, it's everything. Now add the January 11th detail that investigators quietly surfaced weeks into the case. The FBI's forensic electronic analysis identified that something significant occurred at Nancy Guthrie's property on January 11th, 3 weeks before she disappeared. Law enforcement requested neighborhood surveillance footage specifically from that date. They believe the property was visited, observed, or accessed in some capacity nearly a month before the night of January 31st. That's not a spontaneous crime. That's a planning window. That's reconnaissance. And here's the question that the FBI's behavioral unit was circling from the very first week. If the planning began on January 11th, what happened between January 11th and January 31st to confirm the target, finalize the window, and set the night in motion? What information was passed, and through which channel, that told someone the exact right moment had arrived? That thread does not end at the dinner table. It runs deeper. And when federal agents showed up on February 8th carrying forensic extraction equipment, they were not there to ask questions. They were there to follow that thread to its source. By the time federal agents finished processing the exterior of Nancy Guthrie's property, the picture they had built was already deeply unsettling. Biological trace material confirmed to belong to Nancy had been recovered near the front entrance and on the porch. The doorbell camera had been physically yanked from the wall, not just covered. The back doors of the house had been found propped open, and inside, nothing that a person would take voluntarily had been taken. Her purse, her phone, her wallet, her vehicle still parked in the garage. Every anchor of her daily life left behind. The conditions inside that residence were described by the first responding investigators, in their exact words, as very concerning. Not a word chosen casually in a federal briefing. That specific language, very concerning, is the procedural signal that homicide investigators were immediately brought alongside the deputies running the missing persons response. In law enforcement, you don't call a homicide team to a routine disappearance. You call them when the physical evidence tells a story that the victim cannot tell herself. That evidence now needed a source, and a source meant a network, and a network left digital traces. On February 8th, federal agents and local detectives arrived at the Tucson home of Annie Guthrie and her husband Tommaso Caione. They came not with forensic swabs or evidence bags for physical material. They came with specialized hardware, forensic data extraction devices, the kind of equipment that plugs directly into a smartphone, a tablet, or a personal computer and creates a complete digital mirror of every piece of data that device has ever touched. The family cooperated immediately and completely. No warrant was required. The doors opened, the devices were handed over, and the agents went to work. 3 hours they remained inside that residence. What investigators were building in those 3 hours is known in federal casework as social mapping. Every text message sent in the weeks prior, every call log, every deleted email, every GPS location ping, every shared calendar entry, every secondary device that had ever connected to the household router, logged by its media access control address. Investigators know that people rarely maintain perfect information security in their private lives. A casual text mentioning that Nancy was coming for dinner, an offhand message describing her routine, a shared location pin from a family group chat, any one of those ordinary digital exchanges, sent to the wrong person or forwarded one step too far down a social chain, becomes the blueprint that a predator needs to execute a targeted operation with precision. And the operation that was executed on February 1st was precisely targeted. Sheriff Chris Nanos used that specific word himself, targeted, not random, not opportunistic. The behavioral evidence, the timeline, the preparation visible in that footage, all pointed to one conclusion that investigators had confirmed before the first week was over. Someone had been fed a specific, accurate, detailed picture of Nancy Guthrie's life. The agents in that residence on February 8th were not looking for the person who carried out the operation. They were looking for the channel through which the intelligence traveled to reach him. Simultaneously, outside on the street, a flatbed truck was loading the family's blue Honda CR-V onto its platform. The vehicle Tommaso Caione drove the night of January 31st was now being transported to a secure federal impound facility, and it would not come back for a very long time. And what federal technicians were about to spend weeks searching for inside that vehicle would add an entirely new dimension to the question the internet could not stop asking. When the flatbed truck pulled away from Annie and Tommaso Caione's property on that February morning, it carried something the investigation could not afford to release: the blue Honda CR-V. The vehicle Tommaso Cioni drove the night of January 31st was now federal property, logged, tagged, transported to a secure impound facility under the custody of the Pima County Sheriff's Department. And it was not coming back anytime soon. In standard missing persons protocol, a vehicle associated with the last known contact is typically processed within 48 to 72 hours. A preliminary sweep, luminol application, fiber collection, surface swabs. Then it goes back. That's standard. What happened with this vehicle was not standard. As of March 11, 2026, the blue Honda CR-V remained in law enforcement custody. Investigators had taken it to an auto mechanic facility still operating under the direct supervision of the Pima County Sheriff's Department. A source familiar with the process described the vehicle as being actively reassembled following what appeared to be an exhaustive panel-by-panel forensic deconstruction. You don't reassemble a vehicle after a routine evidence sweep. You reassemble it after you have taken it completely apart. Ask yourself what that level of commitment tells you about what investigators were looking for inside it. A former FBI special agent, Jennifer Coffindaffer, stated publicly that she believed the vehicle was being processed to rule out third-party involvement, including the possible presence of tracking devices or signs that the suspect had physically interacted with the vehicle prior to the night of January 31st. That framing is precise and deliberate. A covertly planted GPS tracker attached to the undercarriage of that Honda in the days or weeks before the incident would explain one of the most operationally precise aspects of this entire case. The masked figure did not sit outside Nancy's property for hours in the dark waiting. He arrived at 1:47 in the morning, nearly 4 hours after the drop-off, with exact knowledge that the house was isolated and the window was open. A live tracking signal pinging from that vehicle would have told him everything he needed to know from a completely remote location. He would have watched the digital marker move from Annie's house to Nancy's house. He would have watched it stop. He would have watched it pull away. And then he would have waited the precise amount of time needed to be certain no return trip was coming. The FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey Team, one of the Bureau's most specialized forensic units, was confirmed to be actively working on the case, with a retired FBI supervisory special agent stating publicly that investigators had accumulated mountains of data, that names had surfaced and been evaluated, and that some individuals had been cleared while others may still remain in play, in ways not visible to the public. Meanwhile, on February 13, 2026, the FBI executed a federal search warrant at a residential property approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina foothills. 4 individuals were detained and later released. A gray Range Rover was towed from a nearby parking lot. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed no arrests were made and no sign of Nancy was found at that location. But the operation itself told a story. Federal search warrants require probable cause. A judge reviewed evidence and signed off. Whatever intelligence drove that warrant was specific enough to justify a full tactical response. The forensic results from that operation were still being processed. When the next chapter of this investigation opens, the vehicle, the search warrant, the behavioral profile, the tracker theory, every thread in this case runs toward the same place. Someone out there knows something. And the FBI is building a very precise map of exactly who that is. The question that every forensic analyst kept returning to was not complicated. It was almost uncomfortably simple. How did the masked figure know exactly when the house was empty? For hours. He waited nearly 4 full hours between the garage door closing at 9:50 p.m. and his appearance on that porch at 1:47 a.m. Not 3 hours. Not 5. Nearly 4. That is not the behavior of someone sitting in the dark and guessing. That is the behavior of someone who had confirmation. Someone who knew with operational certainty that the drop-off had been completed and that no return was coming. Theories from investigators and outside analysts include the possibility of a tracking device, potentially an AirTag or similar magnetic GPS module covertly attached to the family vehicle in the days prior to January 31st. If that theory holds, the masked figure never needed to physically surveil the property that night. He would have watched a digital signal travel from Annie's home to Nancy's. He would have watched it stop for a short window. He would have watched it pull away. And then he would have counted down the hours until he was certain that window of isolation was locked in and permanent. But the investigation did not stop at tracking theories. The FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey team, the same specialized unit deployed in the Brian Kohberger, Idaho murders case, was actively analyzing cell tower data from an extensive area surrounding Nancy's Catalina Foothills neighborhood. Every phone that powered down in that area during the 1:47 to 2:28 a.m. window became a point of investigative interest. If the perpetrator or any accomplice switched their device to airplane mode or powered it off entirely during that window, the CAST unit would detect it. Because a phone that stops pinging towers in the middle of a residential neighborhood at 2 o'clock in the morning is not invisible. It is a flag. Investigators also confirmed they were analyzing footage of an unidentified vehicle captured on a Ring camera approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home at 2:36 a.m. on February 1st, just 8 minutes after the pacemaker disconnection timestamp. A vehicle moving away from the neighborhood 8 minutes after the signal dropped. That vehicle has not been publicly identified, and somewhere in the mountains of cell tower data, in the 10,000 hours of video footage collected, and in the genetic genealogy processing of biological trace material recovered from that porch, the answer is already there, waiting to be read. As of today, Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 57 days. No arrests, no confirmed sightings, no public identification of the masked figure captured on that doorbell camera. The FBI and Pima County Sheriff's Department continue to investigate actively, describing it as ongoing until Guthrie is located or all leads are exhausted. The sheriff himself has stated publicly that he believes he knows why this house was targeted, but will not say why. That silence is not absence. That silence is an active investigation protecting itself from the one thing that could compromise it. A retired FBI special agent put it as plainly as anyone has in this entire case. The reward has not been claimed. He believes because the only people who know what happened are the people who made it happen. Over $1.2 million sitting unclaimed. And not one person has walked through the door. Savannah Guthrie told her colleague Hoda Kotb that she wakes up in the middle of the night, and in the darkness, she imagines her mother's terror. "We are in agony," she said. "It is unbearable." 2 questions open this video. Who was the man on that camera? And why has the internet refused to stop pointing at the son-in-law? The forensic evidence answered the second question for us. The family was officially cleared. The scrutiny was never about guilt. It was about the logical chain of information that ran from a family dinner table straight to a masked figure on a dark porch at 1:47 in the morning. And that chain has not been fully traced yet. But the FBI is still pulling it. Nancy Guthrie is still out there. Someone in the Tucson community knows something they may not even realize is significant. If this case matters to you, share this video right now. Subscribe to this channel so you receive every update the moment it drops. And if you have any information at all, call the FBI tip line directly at 1-800-CALL-FBI. What do you think happened that night? Drop it in the comments. And what's the weather like where you're watching from right now? Because somewhere out there, under that same sky, the answer to this case already exists. The FBI just has to find it first.